Education is what's important. Training, preparation for the expected. Education, preparation for the unexpected.
Hello, my name is Amin Tazi. I direct the Middle East Studies at the Krulak Center, Marine Corps University in Quantico, Virginia. It is a privilege and for me a pleasure to introduce Ms. Nataliya Gumenyuk, a Ukrainian journalist and author. She is a founder of the Public Interest Journalism Lab, which promotes constructive discussion around complex social topics. From 2015 to 2020, she headed the independent Ukrainian broadcaster Hromadske TV in the English-language Hromadske International project. I could say that the tables were turned in that day because Nataliya actually interviewed me in Odessa, Ukraine, and now I'm sitting on this side of the table. Nataliya specializes in reporting foreign affairs and conflicts. Her recent book, The Lost Island, Tales from Occupied Crimea, came out in 2020. Features her 6-year reporting from Russian-annexed Crimea. Again, thank you very much for taking the time and being with us. I know for you, this is a very tough time. Again, I want to personalize it. When you and I talked first time in Turkey and then in Ukraine, I told you tales of my life when I was about 15, that going through the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan at the time. This is way more horrible than that, even in the first days. So I feel for you, for your country. I say this in a personal capacity. You as a friend, other Ukrainian friends, but I'm also at awe, as the rest of the world are, at your steadfastness, your bravery in the face of absolute brutality that we never thought we'll see, not just in Europe. Everybody looks at Europe. About humanity, this is unbelievable. So I salute you as a human being and as a person who believes in democracy and fairness and human rights and dignity and sovereignty. With that, could you please, first and foremost, I know you've been traveling around Ukraine. Could you give us a very brief snapshot of how do you see the situation from a military perspective? I know you specialize in that, but also from a societal perspective, from Ukrainian societal perspective. If you just give us a very brief background,
yeah.
Then we jump into this question.
It's tried to be brief, but I'll try. So I think maybe so the country, as many people would understand, but still I guess a lot of people do not really understand that Ukraine is the largest country in Europe, like from geographically. So it's smaller than Russia, but the scale is still big. What is also important that what we feel now that more the whole country is targeted. Of course, the Russian advance with ground troops. It's strong in the south, in the east, and in the north, with Belarus trying also to use the Belarusian territory is used as a playground. So advance is very big, and it's more or less about every bigger town in the areas I've just described. But also there are airstrikes, and the airstrikes are everywhere. And for the people who understand it, also understand that Russia has all the Soviet maps, and Ukraine was a very important part of the Soviet Union. So the military facilities are more or less everywhere in the country, also in the east, on the west as well. So there could be a caserne, a garrison, a military, college, or some places for the warehouse. It could be elsewhere in the smaller towns. We never cared. And the airstrikes were there. They're not very precise, though. So it's often, and I've seen it with my eyes, so often those bombs are falling just on the residential areas. And we're not speaking about some secret places. We're speaking about, military college. So military college is not hit in a town A, but the civilian house is hit. So somehow it feels very much unsecure for more or less anybody. To be honest, after the months of the Ukrainian society adjusted to this, like we have, for instance, a very fast developed air raid application for every tiny town where you kind of know what's happening. So country is quite, reacting very fast. But that is the point. I still want to probably go on with the military strategy, which is probably would describe and would lead to further discussion. So I think we know, very well that the initial idea was to overtake the country very fast. And I don't think it's just because the Russian military are bad. I think that they're also under resistance. So when they understood they cannot overtake the big towns, and when they understood they cannot capture the citizens of that town and hold them, by the way, it won't happen like that. They just shelling wherever they can reach. And the most unfortunate situation, we probably would need to talk earlier, what's happening in Mariupol, quite a large town where there are still 350,000 people under the constant shelling, and there are a lot of attacks on the civilian infrastructure. That's something to discuss separately, From the point of view of the Ukrainian society, I've never seen the Ukrainian society as resilient, strong, organized. I think that there is incredible political unity. Ukraine has a very partisan politics prior to this. But it's all on the level between parties, between different ethnic groups, between people of political views, but also if you speak about hierarchy. So I traveled to quite a small towns and the regional capitals. The support to the president, but the president not like a persona, but really to somebody who is leading Ukraine in this conflict is incredibly strong. But also it's at the same time very decentralized country. So in every village or town, the governor or mayor also takes care, and those people were elected, to run still. I'm speaking, for instance, a provincial mayors, a peaceful provincial towns, but now they are very much determined to take care that the water supply is there, electricity is there under very risky circumstances. So this determination is there, and the further east, let's say paradoxically, the more there are a lot of towns where Russian, due to historical reason, is their first language for a lot of people. So the more proximity, it happened that Russia is attacking the towns which are the most close to Russia geographically, with the people who have kind of more family connections to Russia. They are affected the most, and those people are the most determined to oppose because they are the first victims of this war. So that probably the setting I want to have.
Okay, thank you very much. If I may kind of take it one more step, as what you just said at the end is absolutely, I think Putin wanted maybe 3-4 days, he thought he would take over Ukraine and then have a fait accompli this hand. And one thing he was counting from what assessments in the open media we see is that what he considers to be the Russian sympathizers or Russian speakers will kind of rally with him. I know you have covered both the Donbass, but also you have done a book on with the occupied Crimea. In cities that have more Russian speakers, and you say they have familiar ties, do you see any tendency of not resisting as much, or they are the same as the rest of Ukrainian society? Thank you.
So they do resist more, first of all, and I would explain it. What is very important to understand that the Russian government and Putin himself, for years and years and years, he kind of miscalculated any time they want to deal with Ukraine. He just doesn't understand the concept of democracy, and that this is a society. And what is happening in Ukraine is the will of the Ukrainian people. We do have democratic elections. We do have different political parties. So if it's on something, it's not the chaos, it's a normal democracy. Ukraine is a very multi-ethnic society. We have this very strong idea of the civic nation. And it's true, Ukrainians, they are more conservative, they are more prone to the language, maybe religion, there are always, and the part of the society is, let's say, more urban and liberal and pluralistic. So the discussion and the debate in Ukrainian society is not around the language lines or ethnic lines. It would be usual conservative and liberals. Smaller towns and it's true that people, language will matter more or things like that, or identity parts would matter more. But it never meant that people who have a different views and more liberal and care less about identity but care about social issue, that they are pro-Russian, could be even more adherent to the to democracy, and they just living with some fictional idea of Ukraine. What is interesting, and that as less about those things, as critical about the Kremlin, maybe it was on television, but they are, now the angriest. But unfortunately, they are also the biggest victims. Like those old ladies who watched Russian television, they were not active supporters of Putin. Like they would still sit in their flats, but they are the ones who are targeted the first because they live in the suburban areas. They are the ones who suffer the most because they're less mobile, they less, as like the poor people, the elderly. For them it's the most difficult to survive in these circumstances, so they are targeted the first. So in this regard, like the resistance is stronger, especially in these like towns closer to Russia, because the fight is happening there and they've seen it all with their eyes. But something to add and maybe develop with your question further, what was interesting for me when I ask the people, like ordinary people, common people, like not political activists, not journalists, I really prefer a lot to talk to these common people on the ground. How do they see the peace? And what do they mean by peace? What makes them angry? They really strongly, they wouldn't speak democracy, but they would speak like, it's our right to elect whom we want. We hate when somebody tells us how to live. We hate when somebody wants, like some Putin decides, what my life should be, what the language I should talk, what, it's my choice. So even if they do not describe it as a democracy or the elections, they were very clearly explained. So for them would be the peace, it would be the place where they can elect the president they want and nobody in Moscow would tell them what to do. So by their kind of motivation is really also that feeling of sovereignty, the feeling of freedom. It's very strong in common Ukrainians because it's exactly like how we used to do, how we used to live. It's just really something very important for the people of across a political spectrum.
Thank you very much. I have more questions, but let me open the floor, if you don't mind, to my colleagues, and then if there's time, I will have a couple of more questions. Anybody here?
Yes. Hi. This is Val. I'm the director here. So thanks again for meeting with us and for your time today, and again for being such an inspirational example to really the world as all this unfolds. I just have a very practical question about aid. Is any humanitarian aid making it through to you, the citizens that need it most?
Let me put it this way. Generally, the aid is definitely necessary. Like there is no discussion about that. The problem is not really the lack in some places, like in the most of the country. It's really also because, some things are just not yet delivered. So you basically can't find the things. The shops are open, but it's a logistical issue. It's not really that, like something disappeared. Also, some of the cities are prepared in case they would be besieged, and they need to kind of supply it, and the shops don't work, not because, we don't have food or something, but because there is a curfew, there is no public transportation, the normal routes are not really working. However, there are a number of towns which are under Russian control or under the Russian siege, like the Mariupol. And there, the aid is not allowed. There are very complicated negotiations with some intermediary, with the Red Cross and the others. And we do know that there is some situation created in which it would really endanger people who are allowed to get up, to pick up some humanitarian aid, like in Mariupol, where so really those negotiations are there, the convoys are stalling. So it's not really the lack of it, but where the aid is there, where there is the Ukrainian government under control, which is the most of the places, it's all okay. Like people can deliver things, like from the western part of the country, from other towns. It's a network. The government is dealing with that, the civilian population, volunteer. The problem is exactly with those towns which are not under Ukrainian control at the moment.
Thank you.
Hey, good afternoon. My name is Major. I'm Dean Brown. I'm the one who was reaching out to you via the email. So again, we're very grateful for your time. And I guess one thing I was thinking of is, given what you have covered as a correspondent over there, we're seeing a lot of stories and some sort of common narratives coming out. But what are some things that you've seen that have not been extensively reported on or shared that you think wider audiences should be aware of?
So look, a couple of things, probably some points. In some cases, it's like more about the stories which are told. That is a difficult point. So now we do have a number of towns under the Russian occupation. The people are still resilient there. They're going to the protest. What's happening now that they really are targeting the people like that. Apart from the soldiers, they are bringing all these kind of riot police there. So in the town of Kherson, there was a tear gas used. People were shelled who went to. In the beginning, there were just Russian troops. So, for instance, there were Ukrainians which were outnumbering, so they would kind of sing Ukrainian anthem and, protest. And then they are bringing way more people who actually physically crash those protests. Also, in a lot of places, we just do not have so far information, because the problem that in some of those towns which Russians managed to occupy, they usually cut down the electricity, the mobile connection, and they don't let people out. They do not let people out. So we kind of still lacking the information, but from some of the resources, we understand that there is in the towns which are occupied, it's a targeted, civilians are really targeted. But that's the reason to explain why, for instance, now there are some talks about negotiation or something, why Ukrainian cities or anybody isn't ready to surrender. Because what's happening in the towns under the occupation, the abduction, the disappearance of the people, that's the future of it. What is also probably not still understood, and that's where I'm coming from, my colleague, it wasn't me, but the closest colleague of mine, just recently really talked to quite a lot of people in Mariupol. So really, the strategy of Russia, it's something which makes me scared, because indeed it was confirmed that in the beginning they shot at the power grid station, then they destroyed the stores, then they destroyed the firefighters brigade and the emergency services. So if the town is shelled, there is nobody to come and stop the fire there. And it's made with the reason that the town should surrender, because the humanitarian loss is so big that in the end the Ukrainian government would be evacuated, would need to surrender, for instance, which technically is like a real hostage taking of the whole towns. And can you imagine, it's 300,000 people. So this strategy of deliberate destruction of the infrastructure of the cities, which they are managing to capture, probably because the cities are too far away, and Ukraine, like it's fighting, but the country is so big that still resources are limited. And especially if in town like Mariupol, the Navy is shelling the town from the sea, the planes are coming from, the aviation is coming, and there is no way to put the air defense there. So this strategy, like even in a military term, like to describe this as a strategy to make Ukraine surrender, that's something to highlight. And the point is that, like, many people say, what should we do, because Russia would use some other force. The point for us is that we think that apart from the nuclear power, nuclear arms, they actually using already the worst of it. Like they really already using like quite a heavy weapon. So like the question here is like, why everybody waits? What worse could be used? Okay, the Russia made a special weaponry, but it's still it's already used. So what we are afraid of, what are the things we do not want Russia to, what are the things we are concerned that we would provoke Russia if they already using this strategy, which quite scary and which we understand could be used in the other towns if they, move further. It's just a matter of time for them to move to another towns to use this type of strategy.
Great, thank you. And actually, if I could, just one kind of follow-up talking about, what we can sort of glean from their strategy. You just mentioned, and I know we've all seen, very deliberate targeting of civilian infrastructure, both sort of basic necessities of life, like you said, like, food, electricity, but also targeting first responders to make the situation more miserable. But what do you see as the end game? Because if the end game is to eventually absorb Ukraine, in some fashion, one would think they would kind of want that stuff, but it doesn't. They're destroying the very things they would need, arguably, to.
But I think the point is really to destroy. Like they don't care very much. Like that. It's not really that they want to invade and kind of control, but punish and maybe don't care what. Okay, put some puppet, put somebody, in the part of the territory, but admit Ukraine to, to surrender at some terms they want to do in the capacity they can manage. So that's really looking like that it's not the strategy of the invasion, when they think that, because they understood that people would resist. So it's not really that they want to preserve something for them. I mean, there would be probably some end game for them when they understand that's enough for Ukraine, I don't know, like be humiliated or punished. It sounds like now, to be honest, it's like from the political perspective, from the strategic perspective, from the leadership perspective, it doesn't make sense for Russia. But to be honest, everything which has been done by this moment doesn't really make sense for Russia. Like it doesn't make better for Russia. It really doesn't improve anything there. It destroys Russia itself. So I do feel that some of the red lines crossed, and they ready to, like, so what? I mean, like destroying a number of towns. Okay, I mean, but if it makes Ukraine to surrender, let's do that.
Great, thank you very much.
Again, look, taking that, there are two informations that we hear in the open media, and I just wanted to see your reaction from your own observations or your colleagues. One is that there's, you talked about disappearance, but information that the past today mainly here, that large numbers of Ukrainians have actually been taken by force to Russia. And again, as a historian, when I think of that, the history is that Ukrainians were taken to Siberia a long time ago. So is this, again, I don't want to create a situation if that doesn't exist, but are they taking large numbers of people out to Russia, wherever they're taking? That's one. And two,
Look,
go ahead, please. go ahead with that. I'll come back.
Yeah, okay, so I think that it's really, it's large, but just because the towns are big, I do think it's a bit different. It's not really they are taking from somewhere. However, of course, the reminiscence in the Ukrainian mind would be not really to Siberia, but how people were taken by Germans during the World War II. That's kind of the comparison which is here. But I think that they are taken to Crimea and to Russia to show exactly that there is a limited amount of people which has been evacuated, that Russia has managed to evacuate those people, and then they can destroy those towns because, like they still need to explain something to the local audience. So they take these people just show that, like, see, we are not destroying Mariupol. We are evacuating some people, but let's give them the pretext to kind of target those towns even more.
Okay, thank you. The second question also has to do with the media that we hear, and because I, deal with the Middle East, all these reports that are coming out of Syrians and others that Putin has invited, are they having an effect? Are they there, or so much of that is propaganda and so much reality?
I do not know about Syrians. Chechens are definitely here. That's really no doubt. Like that's had been seen, that's had been confirmed. So we haven't seen that, to be honest. But we also do not really understand how much of the Russian troops were, like the raw figures of the casualties, of the deaths. And we also have the confirmation of some high-profile generals being, killed in Ukraine by the Ukrainian troops. But we feel that it could be, like the people could be moved if they would think that they would need more force. They might bring the people, but I haven't heard and cannot confirm that so far. They still have quite a lot of their own people, I think.
This will be my last question, and this is more speculative. You and I have talked several times, and I want you to. This is your country. This is not a subject which we used to talk about, which were more outside of it. How do you see the near future, next month, in the best of scenarios?
So, I think that anywhere I come to any kind of group of people, the Ukrainians are the biggest optimists. I would answer it in a bit different way. What the Ukrainians are a bit surprised. It's like how to convey this message. We understand all about the nuclear arms. But however, from any other military point of view, it's kind of clear that if Ukraine has more arms, better air defense, it's actually capable to defend itself, and that Russia is not exactly as mighty. So people do not understand why anybody is so afraid to engage with Russia, because it's already clear that Russia could be defeated, of course, if we take aside the nuclear arms, and that enough of javelins, stingers, but first of all, air defense actually would make Ukraine capable to defend, because still, it's not just about determination, but it really works. It works. That would be absolute speculation to understand how it's the negative scenario. Speak about it first, because I didn't want it to be the most probable. It's really this tactics of using heavier weapon, destroying more towns, heavier weapon, destroying more towns, and having a stronger resistance from Ukraine. So when the final destruction would be even bigger. The positive, let's say, is more or less proving to Russia that Ukraine is unconquerable. To the extent that there is some level of agreement when they do understand it's unconquerable, and the damage to the Russian economy and to the Russian state is really so big that they cannot go on, and there should be some real negotiation. What's happening now, it's very far. I think it's we are months away from any reasonable moment when there would be kind of negotiations, because Russia wants to negotiate when Ukraine is in its lowest point, and Ukraine is not in this condition. Russia won't negotiate unless they understand that Ukrainians are really like in a very, very, very bad shape. So they would do as much as possible damage to make Ukraine to this stage. Now it's all just ultimatums. It's quite a fictional negotiations. But the hope is still that I guess like this a clear military support in fact do works, and in fact like the sanctions, they are good, that things are good, but in the end, you know, you defend the city with the stopping the Russian tanks, you defend the city with the air defense. That is the hardest. That's something Ukraine, it's working, by the way, you know, like it's still there. Kiev is largely okay now. Kiev is okay largely now, actually, because air defense works here. It's not because they don't care about Kiev and don't shell here, but they won't do that in Kharkiv, which is too close to the Russian border. They can't do that, and there are also, you know, they can't protect all the towns. How it should be sorted out, I really don't know. Still, too many of the Ukrainian males are not in the army. Still, the lines to get you know, enrolled, they're still lines, and many people are not really even join the military. But of course the economy, you know, isn't really working. Nothing is really working. We just like Ukraine would rely on the international support, but to be honest, air aid, which actually can, you know, back up another town, that's something which gives Ukraine more time. So I can't say that the time is on the Ukrainian side, but the time is also not in the Russian side, to be honest.
Thank you. I'm passing now the floor to my colleagues, but remember the first email I sent you, I said, you know, your enemy is not as strong as people think, and I still stick with that. And I will pass on to.
Good evening. This is Lieutenant Colonel Curtis Kovac. Thank you very much for being with us. To pull apart something you were mentioning earlier, the question I had, which was, what are the aspects of culture, of Ukrainian culture, that are really providing strength right now? You talked about national power, or rather national identity as a democracy as being a key strength. But are there any other unique aspects of Ukrainian culture that are really bolstering and that are hard to suppress and providing strength to the people that are there now?
So yeah, I probably can tell it now. Ukrainians are really incredibly freedom loving. You know, like it's really like the core value. Like people hate to be told what they should be, like by anybody. You know, like really, it's like they have this rebellion in everybody. And though it's always was thought that in the Soviet Union, you know, like people are like not like that, Ukrainians were kind of still like that. Ukrainians has oddly not very strong trust to the authorities. It's a Ukrainian weakness. Oddly enough, today the trust is kind of incredible and unprecedented. But Ukrainians also can very self-organize very fast in extreme circumstances. So it's like the resilience is very strong. And oddly enough, we just really discussed it like in the first day of the war. There is some feeling of fatum, you know, like of the fate in Ukrainian minds. But the difference with this fate is that in Ukrainian mind, the fate in the end, the good will should fight the evil. So like there is a fatalism which is kind of doomed when people think like nothing depends on us, you know, like the world will end. And I do think it's unfortunately with the Russian society, they just didn't have a positive role models of the, you know, like doing something, resisting and reaching something. Ukrainians has this resistance mode and this idea that in the end the good should fight the evil. I don't know, it's maybe in a way naive, But also so empowerment is there, that like, you know, I care about myself. I mean, I don't care what's happening somewhere, but if I can do something, I will do something, which is really makes it very different, and which totally, again, the Russian government never understood. So I do think that's something where which really altogether works. I mean, Ukrainians could be very chaotic. At the same time, so for instance, we are not even in the war, we are not afraid of the military dictatorship, you know, like even anywhere. Um, you know, so people would still take the decision on the local level, but that's probably, they wouldn't afraid of the authority. That's maybe not the perfect thing, you know, when there is an army and the control and command. But if you really speak about this scale and the war at every village or town, I do think that it's in the end, the idea that the people in this neighborhood, in this village, would take care about their village on their own and won't wait till somebody would tell them what to do. And with this, I think that gives also us hope that in the end, it's very hard to invade this kind of country where the response is this time.
Thank you. I'm just very curious, in some of the readings that I've been doing, you hear about fighters coming in, foreign fighters to come in and help Ukraine, whether that's, I think I've heard some Canadians, even some Americans, and other kind of foreign fighters to come in and assist. So can you shed light on how any significant impact that is having on everything on the ground? And the other thing that I'm curious on is, numbers-wise, I think Russia doesn't really convey what truth is in terms of their casualties and people injured. Just very curious what your perspective is on that.
So on the first, as a Ukrainian journalist, we didn't manage to find really them. Like really, we didn't manage to find where are those foreign fighters. So they are really a super marginal force. We knew that there were some trainings, but they are definitely not significant. And to be honest, I think that those limited amount of people who came were not really expecting what is here. What I was told by some of my colleagues but friends at law enforcement, that they probably were expecting kind of Iraq-style street fights, and it's not really here like that. It's artillery shelling, you know, like it's air defense, it's like air bombs, air strikes, and the kind of heavy tank battles. It's not where foreign fighters are, to be honest. This is kind of warfare we have now. It's not a street fight somewhere. And I don't think that anybody coming from the volunteer is really capable to do that, or is supposed to do that. But honestly, we were trying to find where they are. We didn't make it. And the second, please remind me. Yeah, something else. Right? Oh, casualties. So look, I of course would say that probably there are more than like the Ukraine claims that there are 13,000 Russian troops killed. I probably would be cautious about that figure. However, we're definitely speaking about a few thousands. We can reconfirm that, that up to, for instance, we know that there are up to 500 prisoners of war, the Russian prisoners of war. It could be confirmed with the names. There are probably way more of them. But like that might give an amount. So if Ukraine has managed to capture 500,000 of those people, there definitely could be more casualties, because more people die in those battles rather than they are captured. They are not given up. They are not surrendering. On the Ukrainian side, we do not have a figure of the casualties, neither from military side. The UN provides the figure a bit below than 1,000 people who passed away. I do believe it's quite a small figure, because talking from one town to another, I know just in the bigger towns there would be 300 there, something, so it could be a bigger figure, and it could be beyond the 1,000 of the Ukrainian soldiers who killed, because those figures are not public, but we do know that in that place there was, for instance, attack. Especially, we have the cases when the air raid was done on the garrison, and the people were sleeping, and there were 70 people died in one occasion in one town, and in another town there were 50 cadets. I mean, I'm speaking about like soldiers who were Ukrainian soldiers who were just sleeping in their garrison, and they're mainly, these kind of cadets, not really like the military. The military don't sleep in these facilities. But the Ukrainian claims that there are 13,000 of Russians killed. At some point, just to clarify, when we wanted, it's impossible to identify independently, but such organizations like Bellingcat and some other investigative journalists, they were trying to compare it with the amount of weaponry which is destroyed and how much people it can keep, it can have. So they were more or less corresponding, that at least when the Ukrainian government claimed there are 5,000, they said it's possible. I don't know how it's with 13,000, but I do think that the figures like at least 5,000, they're definitely reasonable.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you again for taking the time to speak to us. My question was regarding what seems to be the perception of Ukrainians that you've interacted with regarding the international support that Ukraine has been receiving. President Zelensky has been very active in lobbying the international community for more support, and the type of support that's being requested is also at times been very direct in chiding countries for not providing adequate support or be willing to support. What seems to be the view on that among the people in the places that you've been traveling to?
So Ukrainians are grateful for the support. They know that it's maybe unprecedented. And they are grateful to the United States, to UK, especially to the countries who provided the military aid, because it's why Ukraine is able to fight, like without javelins and low other things, like they won't be able at all to fight. That's quite clear. However, at this stage, after the months, I do think that there are some, not the high expectation, but because it's such a deliberate civilian casualties, I think the Ukrainians might be a bit more disappointed with the international organizations and institutions. Like the UN can't do anything. All these international organizations which are existing, the OSCE, Council of Europe, like they really cannot help. They can provide financial support, the support for all the sanctions against Russia, the Western companies pulling out of Russia. It's really greeted, very well, and the financial support is very important. But I do think that on the human level, people just don't understand why it could be more in military way. They do understand that they feel a bit like, okay, I mean, like we understand that NATO won't be here fighting, but the individual nations, what are they afraid of? If they would help, we feel like we would pursue, and we would regain something. And it is not because we are, like Ukraine fighting, and that's why we want to support, but it's really about like saving lives. We don't see any other way to save lives. There is some probably disappointment with organizations like NATO. I think like we understand that there was a lot of discussion about the prior to that Russia wanted Ukraine, the West kind of say that Ukraine would be neutral. But the point is that people don't understand, like, okay, like why do we have all these alliances if they cannot contain this country? Because we understand that it's not an obligation to defend Ukraine, but there are no real limitations. There is nothing which forbids these countries to engage in some way to save the civilian lives. So they do feel a bit, and I do think that where is interesting moment now, that we started from that. The Ukrainians, they don't feel that they're fighting just for their land, their families, their cities. They do feel like we fight because it cannot be the case that the sovereign country can be attacked in this way, that the city could be taken hostages, that the civilians could be just bombed. And if we agree on that, and that's just everybody is witnessing that, is it really the world we want to have? Why all then all those discussions about international order, security, sounds quite, hypocritical. So therefore, it's not really the accusation. But I do think that people think that we fight here not just for us, we actually fight for the rules, because, and it's unfortunate that these are us who doing that. And it would be absolutely normal and adequate if there would be more help, more support, because the reason for this war is something bigger than, like just Ukraine. However, of course, Putin wants to destroy Ukraine, but we understand it's really about the sovereignty of any country, and also human life. Doesn't matter which nationalities they are.
Oh, thank you. You mentioned in case of Kyiv and air defense. A lot of military analysts in the open source section are kind of surprised in a good way, because that Russia has not been able to establish control over the skies of Ukraine. From your words, I gather that the air defense is one of the reasons. But is it just the air defense? And we heard again that this is Russian news, so we don't know how much of it is true. 3 S-300 batteries were hit. If they haven't hit them all the way now, almost a month, is it that Ukraine has a much bigger air defense system than the Russians thought? That's number one. And number two, is it that the Russians are not committing aircraft deep into Ukrainian territory? Again, if you don't want to reveal this or something, but the question is, it's surprising why, that Russia still hasn't been able to. You said they had the maps, they knew Ukraine, of course, as part of the USSR, as that they haven't been able to establish air superiority. And this also with this question, is Ukrainian Air Force still operational in your view? Do you know anything about that?
So
Not
first, I mean, I can say, first of all, yeah, I'm civilian. I'm not really the military reporter, so some things I just do not probably understand as well as you do. So like, excuse if I kind of would be mistaken. What I understand that they probably wanted to occupy it also from the ground. And they were thinking first about occupying the city, not really like first targeting the military objects first of all, and kind of come as if they are like these liberators. So in the first initial strategy, there was no task to really bomb the cities to this extent. But as soon as they understand that their ground troops were hit, including with the javelins and other things, they started to use this different strategy of bombing the civilian infrastructure. So it was like the change in the initial strategy of Russia. Air defense in Ukraine is still operational, but it's damaged partially. Quite a lot of things are damaged, we know it. So the point is that they are using resources carefully. Like what I understand, they just try to use it when it's strategic, and that's why sometimes they don't use it, and there would be some damage done because they're trying to, like organize the resources to understand where it matters, in which town, in which situation, with which target.
And also, is Ukrainian Air Force still operational? The Air Force itself?
Yeah. So that's what I said. That like they're operational, but they are limiting themselves to the very strategic, like objects or fights.
We have taken a lot of your time. I know it's late for you. You are super busy. I want to thank you on behalf of the Krulak Center, Middle East Studies, ourselves, and personally as someone who knows you. Thank you so much. I hope to see you in a free and independent Ukraine very soon. I will come back and we can discuss this in the past. Stay strong, stay steadfast. Again, as somebody who, from a personal perspective, I tell you, in 1979 on Christmas Eve, when the Russians, showed up in Afghanistan, Time magazine said that Afghanistan is now Afghanistan SSR. I still have that copy. Well, later on, there was no Soviet Union. So stick around. I think if with the way you're going, and hopefully you get the aid that you need, there are going to be some tearful days, but I think at the end of the day, your country will come stronger. And I wish personally I could do anything, but if there's anything I can do, you let me know. But, and stay there.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All the best.
Thank you. Yeah, all the best. All the best. Thank you for your interest.
Take care of yourself.
Education is what's important. Training, preparation for the expected. Education, preparation for the unexpected.